There are very few companies in the world that don't just sell products, they define entire eras. You don't buy a phone, you buy into a philosophy, a way of thinking, a promise of perfection. Apple has spent decades perfecting that promise. Every launch rehearsed, every pixel polished, every failure buried before it could be seen, until now. In the summer of 2025, something happened that wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not at Apple, not like this. What began as a quiet rollout, a subtle upgrade wrapped in glossy phrases like on-device intelligence and privacy-first AI, quickly became something else, something they couldn't contain. It started with glitches, delays, strange behaviors. Then, the silence broke. Screens froze, photos leaked, answers turned into riddles. In a company where precision is religion, the system had begun to unravel, in public. And behind the scenes there were whispers, internal warnings ignored, engineers dismissed. A product rushed to market not because it was ready, but because the world was watching, and Apple had waited too long. This isn't the story of a bug, this is the story of control lost, trust fractured, and a rare public glimpse behind the curtain of a company that never stumbles until it did. What happens when the world's most secretive tech empire makes a catastrophic mistake in front of everyone? To understand how Apple's foray into AI ended in embarrassment, you first have to understand what Apple truly is, not just what it sells, not even what it builds, but what it represents, to the market, to its loyal followers, and most of all, to itself. This is a company that doesn't move fast and break things. It studies from a distance. It watches competitors rush in, stumble, get messy, and then, only when the timing is right, it moves, with precision, with elegance, with almost unnerving confidence. The original iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, the iPad wasn't the first tablet, even the Apple Watch wasn't the first wearable. But when Apple entered those markets, it didn't just join the race, it redefined the game. The competitors became irrelevant. The public stopped asking if the product category would work, because Apple had already decided it would. This reputation wasn't built overnight, it was carved from an obsession with detail, an intolerance for imperfection, and a company culture so secretive it sometimes bordered on paranoid. Internally, teams work in silos. Features are hidden from engineers working just feet away. Devices are disguised in nondescript cases. Even now, Apple's employees often don't know what they're building until it's announced on stage. And that stage, those moments, became rituals. The white background, the click of a remote, the hushed breath before a reveal. One more thing, it wasn't a presentation, it was theater, and no one did it better. Apple was untouchable, the kind of untouchable that comes not just from money or success but from consistency, a nearly 2-decade streak of getting it right again and again and again. Where other tech giants tripped over ambition, Apple thrived by staying cautious, measured, deliberate. So when artificial intelligence exploded into the mainstream, when ChatGPT broke the internet, when Google and Microsoft started building entire products around machine learning, Apple's silence was deafening. They said almost nothing, no rushed launches, no flashy demos, not even vague promises. Just the cold, familiar silence of a company that never blinks under pressure. But beneath the silence, something was shifting. Competitors were advancing rapidly, embedding AI into search, productivity, even customer service. Apple users began to wonder, why isn't Siri getting smarter? Why hasn't iOS changed? Inside the company, the tension grew. Executives knew the longer they waited, the more pressure built. Investors were restless. The media asked weekly whether Apple had missed the moment. And quietly, somewhere inside Apple Park, engineers were racing, not just to catch up, but to catch up without compromising the Apple identity, privacy, control, security. It wasn't just about building AI, it was about building AI the Apple way. And that's where the problems began. Because Apple wasn't just trying to create a chatbot or an assistant, it was trying to rebuild intelligence itself, wrapped in encryption, processed entirely on device, and governed by principles that made traditional machine learning models difficult to implement. They called it Project Ajax. Few outside the company knew what it meant. Fewer still understood just how much was riding on it. What had started as a cautious research effort was now a billion-dollar bet. But no matter how polished the press releases would one day be, no matter how sleek the keynote slides might look, the foundation was already beginning to crack. Because this time Apple wasn't entering a market with a polished alternative. It was entering a war, and unlike the past, it wasn't the one setting the rules. In 2023, the ground shifted. A product most people hadn't heard of just months before suddenly redefined the future. It wasn't a device, it wasn't even an app. It was intelligence itself, rewired, repackaged, and delivered directly into people's hands. ChatGPT crossed 1 million users in days, then 100 million. It wrote code, it passed exams, it drafted legal arguments, therapy responses, poetry, even film scripts. Not only did it worked too well. The world wasn't just impressed, it was stunned. And in Silicon Valley the alarm bells went off. Google scrambled to integrate its own AI model, Gemini, into everything from search to Gmail. Microsoft injected Copilot into Office, Teams, and even Windows itself. Nvidia's chips became gold. AI startups raised billions overnight. It was a technological gold rush and everyone was moving. Everyone, except Apple. The company that had defined innovation for decades said almost nothing. No AI assistant, no keynote reveals, no big demos, just silence. Tim Cook, when pressed in interviews, dodged the topic. Investors leaned in, tech commentators speculated, users started to notice. Siri hadn't changed in years. Apple's intelligent suggestions felt clunky, outdated. It was like watching a once dominant athlete ignore the starting gun. But behind the scenes, Apple wasn't ignoring AI. It was watching, calculating, and building something, quietly. A few words began surfacing in tech forums and investor calls. Project Ajax. That was the internal codename, Apple's secret AI initiative. Nothing official, no details, just fragments, whispers. But one thing became clear. Apple wasn't trying to lead the AI revolution, it was trying to control it. Because Apple's brand was never just about elegance, it was about ownership. From the lockdown App Store to the walled garden of iOS, control was everything. Apple didn't trust the cloud, it didn't rely on third-party models, it didn't let the unpredictable loose inside its ecosystem. And AI, by its very nature, is unpredictable. It learns, it adapts. It sometimes makes mistakes Apple can't explain, and that's a problem Apple can't tolerate. But the pressure was mounting. Investors wanted movement, users demanded answers. Tech was accelerating at breakneck speed, and for once, Apple wasn't leading the conversation, it was chasing it. Internally, teams were pulled from other projects. Hardware divisions were asked to make concessions. iOS 18 was restructured from the ground up to accommodate a new kind of intelligence. One that Apple hoped would live on the device itself, never sent to the cloud, never out of reach, never out of control. But that design came with limitations. AI models need massive computing power and vast datasets, both of which are difficult to manage entirely on a phone or tablet. Apple engineers knew this. They also knew OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft were solving those problems by cutting corners Apple never would. The challenge wasn't just to build AI, it was to build Apple AI, clean, private, minimalistic, and secure. In a way, the company was trying to reinvent the wheel, but on their own terms, under their own roof. And as the summer of 2024 approached, rumors intensified. Internal sources leaked phrases like AI first, contextual awareness, natural language memory. The world began to anticipate the comeback moment, Apple's great reveal. But what no one outside the walls of Cupertino knew was just how unstable the foundation truly was. They were building something ambitious, but they were building it fast, too fast. And that was the beginning of the end. Then came the announcement, WWDC 2025, the moment tech fans had waited for, Apple's great answer to the AI revolution. The stage was minimal, the lights were sharp. Tim Cook walked out with the calm confidence of a man about to shift the narrative. And then came the words, private, secure, revolutionary AI. For the first time, Apple leaned fully into the buzzwords it had once carefully avoided. On-device intelligence, personalized assistance, seamless integration, your AI, on your terms. They called it Siri 2.0, a complete overhaul powered by what they described as a custom, Apple-built large language model. It could schedule meetings across multiple time zones. It could rewrite your emails in different tones. It could summarize long documents, answer natural language questions, even predict what you might want before you asked. All processed locally, no data ever leaving your device. The demos were sleek, polished, pre-recorded, yes, but compelling. A text message drafted in seconds. A calendar rearranged intuitively. An iPad anticipating a user's workflow and generating suggestions in real time. To the public, it felt like a return to form. Apple had waited, perfected, and now delivered. The media lit up. Tech outlets hailed it as Apple's smartest leap in a decade. Influencers posted glowing reviews, the stock price jumped, but not everyone was sold. Developers at WWDC whispered about how limited the APIs felt. Privacy experts questioned how true on-device processing really was, and beta testers, early adopters with privileged access, began to notice something Apple hadn't mentioned on stage. The AI lagged. Sometimes it didn't respond. Sometimes it froze entirely. In some cases it generated wildly incorrect results. Simple commands took several seconds, far longer than anything powered by the cloud-based models users had grown used to. On iPads, entire workflows were interrupted. Some devices rebooted mid-task. Others lost their personalized settings without warning. The new Siri, meant to feel smarter, felt unreliable. And for Apple users, reliability was the one thing they'd never had to question. Feedback rolled in fast. Developers flagged crashes in Xcode. UI testers discovered edge cases where the AI would silently fail. Some users reported battery drain, overheating. Others filed support tickets that vanished into silence. Apple pushed small fixes, quietly, with minimal acknowledgement. But the damage was growing. Because this wasn't just a bug, this was Apple's pride, its seamless ecosystem, being bent under the weight of a system that wasn't ready. Every piece of Apple's strategy relied on integration, iPhone to iPad, Mac to watch, messages to calendar to Siri. The promise had always been, it just works. But with their AI system forced into every corner of the user experience, the very thing Apple had spent decades perfecting, cohesion, was beginning to break. And for the first time in years, Apple didn't seem in control. It seemed reactive, scrambling. They had launched in the dark, rushed not by vision but by pressure. And now, the cracks were showing. Then came the glitch. It wasn't in a lab, it wasn't behind closed doors or buried in obscure developer logs. It happened live, on a regular Tuesday, to a regular user, doing something as simple as asking a question. She was a mother in California testing out the new AI assistant. Her son had a fever, nothing serious, she thought. So she asked Siri, now upgraded with Apple's new language model, a question millions of people ask every day: what should I give my child for a 103-degree fever? The response came instantly, confident, precise, wrong. The AI recommended an adult medication in adult dosage, something potentially fatal to a child. The mother caught it in time, but she posted the screenshot, just to warn others. And within hours, the internet exploded. But that wasn't the end of it. Another user, a teenager, posted that his AI assistant had miscategorized a sensitive photo, marking it as shared content, and automatically uploaded it to a family album synced across devices. Within minutes, it was visible on his parents' phones. That post was removed. But the screenshots? They were everywhere. On Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, Discord, YouTube. The stories multiplied. AI offering outdated legal advice, flagging innocent calendar events as suspicious, sending texts to the wrong recipients, personal information exposed, context misread, promises broken. The hashtag #Agate trended globally. Commentators called it Apple's Chernobyl moment for privacy. Late-night hosts mocked it on national TV. The reaction wasn't just technical, it was emotional. This was Apple, the company that promised your data stayed private, the one that built its reputation on not being like the others, on being secure, on being safe. Now, it was accused of doing the very thing it had sworn never to do. And worse, Apple denied everything. In a carefully worded statement, the company said, "There is no evidence that our AI system has violated any user privacy protocols. These appear to be isolated incidents. We are investigating." But the public wasn't buying it. Because the screenshots were too specific, the stories too credible, people were angry, people were scared, and more than anything, they felt betrayed. The memes came next. Side-by-side comparisons of Siri and ChatGPT, Apple Intelligence jokes trending on YouTube Shorts, posts with captions like, "Can't spell artificial intelligence without fail." Apple's silence, once its greatest strength, was now making things worse. For the first time in recent memory, the company had lost control of the narrative, and they didn't have a playbook for what came next. Behind closed doors, chaos. The headlines painted the story as a technical failure, but inside Apple's gleaming Cupertino headquarters, something deeper was unraveling. It started with a single leak. An internal email quietly passed to a journalist at The Verge titled simply, "Ajax was not ready." The message was raw, direct. authored by a senior AI engineer just weeks before the launch. It warned that the on-device language model was undertrained, that edge case scenarios were barely tested, and that real-world variables, accents, background noise, emotional tone, had not been fully accounted for. The final line: this system is not fit for public release. Apple leadership had seen it and released it anyway. More leaks followed, Slack messages, panicked test results, QA flags ignored, engineers asking to delay rollout, product managers warning about Siri hallucinations, all buried, all denied, all silenced. And then came the real blow. A quiet, unannounced resignation. Dr. Elena Su, Apple's head of AI development, gone, no press release, no farewell. Her LinkedIn title simply changed to, formerly at Apple. Insiders whispered that she'd clashed with Apple's SVPs, that she'd pushed for a delay and been overruled, that she had warned launching now means reputational risk. It was no longer about code, it was about culture. Apple's obsessive secrecy, its pride, its shield, had become a trap. In most companies, AI systems are tested against massive public data sets, exposed to real user input across varied conditions. At Apple, everything stayed internal, sandboxed, sanitized. One former engineer, anonymized in a whistleblower interview, described it like this: "We were building a system that had to understand the world, but we weren't allowed to show it the world. Entire departments couldn't access live testing tools. Beta environments were limited to a handful of internal devices. Training data was stripped of anything considered sensitive, which, in Apple's terms, meant anything real. They had tried to create intelligence without context. And the result was exactly that. A model that looked smart in demos but crumbled the moment it met reality. Apple's culture, precise, isolated, controlled, was colliding with a technology that thrived on chaos. Behind the polished keynote stages and white background product shots was a team breaking under pressure. Deadlines rushed, QA ignored, UX designers bypassed, because Apple didn't just want to catch up with the AI race. They wanted to own it, on their own terms, but those terms didn't work anymore. Apple moved fast, the glitch was patched, a new iOS update went live within 48 hours, press releases were issued, support lines flooded. Affected users received Apple Store credit, $50 for what the company called temporary disruption. But it wasn't just a glitch. And for Apple, this wasn't just a disruption, this was a scar. Lawsuits came next. One filed in California claimed negligent AI deployment after the medication error incident. Another in New York accused Apple of violating its own privacy pledge, citing the photo leak and unintentional file sharing. By week's end, 4 class actions were underway. One tech columnist summed it up like this: Apple built its empire on trust. But trust, once cracked, doesn't update like software. The media didn't hold back. Apple's Vista moment read one front page referencing Microsoft's infamous stumble. Others called it the AI debacle, #Siri fail, Cupertino's fall, or simply the day Apple lost the room. Wall Street listened. Apple's stock dipped 9% in a single week. Not a crash, but a signal. Investors began questioning the AI roadmap. Project Ajax was quietly renamed. The second phase rollout was indefinitely delayed. Rumors spread that Apple would scale back its generative AI division, that the next iOS update would roll back several flagship features, but the damage went beyond charts and lawsuits. This was about the future, because AI wasn't a product anymore. It was the interface, the operating system beneath the operating system. Microsoft knew this. So did Google. Their AI models were already powering search, productivity tools, enterprise solutions. They were moving fast and publicly. Apple had tried to build its future in the dark, but AI thrives in light, open source communities, wide datasets, real-world interaction. While others invited the world in, Apple closed the doors. And this time, it backfired. Developers pulled back. Startups stopped prioritizing iOS AI integrations. Students, creators, and young users began leaning into tools powered by GPT, Gemini, Claude, and Perplexity. The cool factor, shifting. And while Apple worked behind the scenes to repair its image, a quiet question began echoing across the tech world. What if Apple's best days are behind it? Not because it couldn't build great products, but because the world was changing too fast for a company built on control. Apple is still Apple, it hasn't collapsed, the stores are still open. The keynote invites still carry the same brushed metal glow, the iPhones still sell, The branding still whispers elegance, confidence, control. But something changed. This wasn't just a tech failure. It was a philosophical collapse. Apple believed it could do what no one else could. Deliver artificial intelligence without mess, without compromise, without risk. It thought it could reinvent the future, without letting the future touch it. In a world racing forward, Apple stood still, refining, delaying, perfecting. But in AI, perfection isn't a starting point, it's a process. And in trying to avoid the mess, Apple became the mess. Because AI isn't a product you ship and polish, it's a mirror. It reflects your values, your data, your reality. And if you try to control that too tightly, the mirror cracks. Apple's AI failure wasn't just about a broken voice assistant or some bad headlines. It was about a company so obsessed with controlling the narrative that it lost sight of what the narrative had become. A system designed to protect its users ended up exposing them. A company defined by its ability to learn from others' mistakes ignored its own people. In trying to be perfect, they forgot how to fail safely. This wasn't just a bug, this was a betrayal, not just of users, but of everything Apple claimed to stand for. And the scar is permanent, because in Silicon Valley, nothing is more dangerous than seeming untouchable. When you fall, it echoes. So no, this won't destroy Apple. But something broke. A belief, a certainty, a grip. For the first time in decades, the most polished company on earth showed something unexpected: vulnerability. And in tech, you can survive a failure. You can even recover from a scandal. But once the illusion of perfection is shattered, you never get it back. If this story made you question the tech you trust, if it opened your eyes to what happens behind the glass, then don't just watch. Be part of the conversation. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who still thinks Apple can't fail, and subscribe for more untold stories from the world of tech, where even the giants aren't safe from their own ambition. This is just the beginning.